Well, hey, good morning. It is Friday, November 6th, and I'm Shaka Mitchell, the Tennessee State Director for the American Federation for Children, and we are coming to you with a special, super special choice chat with Ryan Cantrell, who is one of my colleagues also at the American Federation for Children. I'm not sure, frankly, what Ryan's exact title is, other than that he is political strategist extraordinaire and also is a husband and father and cares a lot about kids and making sure that all kids do well. So Ryan, thanks for joining us on our choice chat.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And, political extraordinaire is probably a little too high of a title. And frankly, there are days that I don't remember my title too, Shaka. So I don't blame you for not knowing.
Hey, if this week, I think if we've learned anything, it's that if national pollsters and political commentators can make a living off of giving totally wrong numbers for the past 9 months, then hey, anybody can be an expert. Anybody can do politics.
That's right. Well, that's right. No, it was funny. Real quick, I was watching the Today Show a couple of days ago, and Al Roker, the longtime weatherman of the Today Show, made a funny joke. Said, "Oh, so you guys think prognosticating is so easy now? So now you really get to understand what we go through on a daily basis."
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You never thought you'd say it, but I actually have far more faith in meteorologists than I do political prognosticators at this point. Well, thanks for being on. And normally on our choice chats, and if this is the first time you're watching, we want to thank you. But we sort of started this series as a way to talk to educators and parents from around the state as a way to highlight some of the bright spots that are happening in education. It's been a heck of a year, honestly, for everyone in 2020, especially when it comes to kids, in many cases being out of their school for the better part of 8 months at this point. And so we started Choice Chats as a way to highlight some of the bright spots. This week, of course, the only thing that you can talk about is the election. And so Ryan has got a lot of political experience and expertise. He is from Alabama and spent some time working in the Alabama legislature. He's worked for a couple of different national education nonprofits and has just seen a lot of things. But we wanted to just talk to him about what does this mean? What might the elections mean for education and as it relates to schools? And so that's why we've got Ryan on. We're really, really thankful to have him. And so Ryan, I'll just let's talk about a high level. Let's start at the top of the ticket. Of course, the thing that everybody's talking about, even my own kids. My 8-year-old came downstairs this morning, and the first thing she said pre-dawn was, have they finished counting in Nevada? And I thought, oh, goodness gracious. What happened to the days where you just asked us for, cereal? Daddy, can you open the milk? She wanted to know if they finished counting for Nevada. So everybody's talking about the presidency. When it comes to and as we air this, it's 11:34. There's still several states where ballots are being counted, and so no winner has been declared that I know of. Though it looks like former Vice President Joe Biden has got a slight advantage in some states. What does that mean? Does that have any importance? Who's the president when it comes to education?
I mean, sure, it has importance. The president sets the conversation for the entire nation. That was one of the reasons that school choice proponents or advocates were excited to have a president in office, in Donald Trump, who actually was willing to go out and actually talk about the issue and talk about the importance of the issue. When it comes to actually making policy, I think that's a different story. The vast majority of laws, especially Shaka, like we work on a daily basis, are all made at the local level. There's been talk for a long time about creating some type of federal tax credit program, and that would be fantastic if somehow we could do that. But right now, all of these programs, whether it's charter school legislation, whether it's open enrollment in between public schools, or the issue that we work on, a private school choice. All of that is done at the local level, whether it's at the state legislature or even sometimes at even more micro level, as Colorado did a long time ago in their first school choice program on a very local level. So it definitely matters. It matters who the president is. It matters, not just for our issue, but for all issues across the board. But when it comes to actually making policy, it's important to remember that the vast majority of that stuff is done on the state and local level.
Yeah, that's great, and it also seems like it's not necessarily the case that despite maybe some of the rhetoric and things have been like hyper partisan in recent years, but it seems like partisanship doesn't necessarily matter a ton, right? I mean, because you see public opinion, it seems to really be tracking now towards more educational options, towards greater school choice. And so what I'm thinking about, for instance, is our last Democratic president, President Barack Obama. It wasn't like the door was barred in terms of policy, right? I mean, we saw tons of charter school expansion under his administration. So maybe it's not just a partisan issue either.
No, that's exactly right. It's absolutely not, and not just at the federal level, but also at the local level, like we're talking about. I mean, we have longtime supporters in a number of states that are of both parties, and because they realize the importance of this issue. And then when you look at what polling has shown for as long as I can remember, when it comes down to the UME level, the non-elected folks, the people that are the just normal people. That there's absolutely no partisanship when it comes to this issue. I mean, when you look across the board and you see, something that shows in the mid to high 50s of support among one party, and the mid to high 60s of another party, that's a pretty big deal. I mean, there aren't a whole lot of issues that partisanship does not matter, but this is one of those that everyone cares about education. If you have a kid, you have a child, you have a student who is enrolled in school, you're going to care about education. If you own a business, you don't have kids, you're going to care about education because that impacts your bottom line. That impacts the people, your ability to find educated workforce. For senior citizens or folks who are beyond the age of caretaking for kids, they care about education too, because they want to see that legacy continue to go on over through the years. So yes, this is an issue that is not just one-sided. Like you said, when President Obama was in office, we did see unprecedented charter school growth. A lot of money was pushed towards charter school growth, and so I do think that regardless of who ends up being elected, hopefully sometime before the end of this year, I think regardless of who we see in office, there will always be a chance to see some type of school choice growth, and there will also always be an emphasis on education.
Yeah. Well, let's maybe shift a little bit then to kind of what's happening in the states, and because some of these states are really top of mind for, I know, a lot of people who are watching these so-called sort of battleground states, right? And as it turns out, the American Federation for Children is really active in several of these battleground states. I mean, not for nothing, but we work in states where the stakes are a little bit higher, I think. And so I'm thinking about Wisconsin, North Carolina, Georgia, Nevada. These are all Arizona, all states where we've got a pretty significant presence. So I wonder if you could, maybe just pick a few and tell us kind of like what's the state of play in some of these states. Like, what's Arizona look like if you stayed on top of any of it, after the election, and what's the climate like for school choice?
Yeah. So if you would have asked me a month ago to prognosticate what this was going to look like rolling into 2021, I probably would have painted a different picture than I'm going to be able to this morning. But when you look at the states that AFC is in particular invested in, as you mentioned, Wisconsin, Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia, if all of these states were to end up voting or going for Vice President Biden, school choice down ballot really had a great night. Arizona was one of those states, Arizona and Georgia both. Well, I mean, you could lump in North Carolina too, where those were three states that Democrats in particular poured a ton of money in to try to flip the state legislatures. And we're talking, tens of millions of dollars across these states. Wisconsin was a little bit more out of reach. Wisconsin Republicans had a higher threshold of a majority there, and so there was really we were never worried about losing a majority there. But the closer it gets, the harder it is to pass legislation. And so in states like North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, we're going to end up, in some cases, not only maintaining majorities or just staying put where we are, but there's even a possibility in Arizona that we pick up a seat in the House. In North Carolina, we were really concerned about losing both chambers, both the House and the Senate chamber. And at the end of the day, there's a possibility of us picking up a seat or two. And so, and when I say us, I mean, school choice majorities and school choice people who believe in and vote for school choice issues. And so I think that 2021, whereas, a month or two ago, we were really concerned that 2021 might not be a great year for us when it comes to passing legislation. I really think that we're going to have the opportunity to not just introduce meaningful legislation, but maybe even get it moving pretty in a pretty good way. And so we'll see how that shakes out. But yeah, it really was a really good night in a handful of those states.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I think if you had asked me thinking about Tennessee even 3 weeks ago, and you and I have these conversations on a weekly basis, and I call you up and Ryan, you get to be kind of like the counselor, psychiatrist a little bit, because I call Ryan up and, depending upon the day, I'm like this. I'm like, oh, Ryan, we're going to lose everywhere, or it's going to be great, and Ryan says, what happened? You said the opposite 6 hours ago. But in Tennessee, if you had asked me a month ago, 3 weeks ago, the polling was really indicating, as you say, something else, right? I think we have to think long and hard about where the gaps are in the polls, because the polls don't always indicate what people are going to do when they get into the ballot, booth, into the voting booth. It was also a really strange final month of the campaign, right? I mean, so just thinking about, and here in Tennessee, we hosted the final presidential debate. That last debate went really differently from the first debate. Between those two debates, you had a new Supreme Court justice appointed, the president, his wife, their son, and like dozens of other people, it seems like, contracted coronavirus. I mean, it was a pretty crazy month. And so I thought that was going to really spell trouble for Republicans in Tennessee. As it turned out, it did not. There was only one Republican in the who was up for election who lost. That was a senator from Nashville. And by the way, he is a senator who opposed school choice, which I don't think that's the reason he lost, but I think that was not it was just not a factor, right? So yeah, definitely some big surprises here. Were there other places, any other state that you would call out where you went, boy, that was a real surprise? I didn't see that coming.
I think the big one for me is North Carolina. I mean, North Carolina, Democrats in particular, and they poured just a ton of money, and they had a highly contested gubernatorial race, and a highly contested U.S. Senate race. And so there was just a boatload of money being poured into that state. And so for Republicans and for our school choice folks to be able to hold on at the state legislative level really speaks to, I think people separate the two things. So people, I think when it comes to, like you said, when you get to the voting booth, I think people separate what goes on at the federal level and what goes on in their state house or state legislative level. But I can tell you that, I mean, if you want to drill down into a handful of like specific races, to your point
Sure.
about, whether or not this issue impacts those races, I think your home state of Tennessee is a perfect example of one where, you had a very highly contested state legislative race in your incumbent education committee chairman there, Mark White, highly contested race where school choice was a spotlight issue. I mean, that was an issue that they tried to make a big deal out of. And what do we see at the end of the day is he goes on and wins by 8 points. Another state where that happens, we have in Missouri, our incumbent senator who sponsored ESA legislation for us there, Senator Andrew Koenig. He was in a very tight race in suburban St. Louis, and so we're those same type of voters that we've been talking about that have been running away from Republican candidates and would be voting against Donald Trump in the presidential race. Ended up reelecting him by 10 points. And that was another race where school choice was a key issue. In fact, one of his opponent actually said that he wanted that Senator Koenig, his goal in passing ESA legislation was to kill public education. So, I mean, we're talking about a huge issue there. And so those are a couple of Republicans, but on the opposite side of the aisle as well in Georgia, and this was a primary race, we had incumbent state senator Donzella James, who went out on a limb and supported ESA legislation expanded school choice legislation for special needs students, and really got a lot of slack from within her party. She was the only Democratic senator to end up voting for that issue, but in a three-way primary race where that was an issue, she still got 63% of the vote. So the people who are scared to vote for these issues because they're scared of the impact it may have on them when it comes around to election time really don't have anything to look at and show as an example of this guy got beat because of this issue. That's just never happened as far as I've seen. And if it has happened in one way or the other, we've actually seen where support for this issue actually increases your percentage of support in an election. So I think that this election in particular is a really good litmus test that we can go out and talk to legislators and say, listen, if you're worried about the impact that this could have on your reelection campaign, you shouldn't be, because here are what the numbers show, and they're very positive.
Well, and I don't often have the opportunity to give hot takes on choice chats, because usually it's not very political. But November 6th seems like a different day. Here's a hot take. I think that a big reason that people may have seen President Trump talk so much about school choice in August, September, October is because it does do really well with voters, right? It does poll so high. I mean, to your point, here in Tennessee, we saw members who were very nervous because as freshmen, they voted in support of education savings accounts. And then this is their first time being up for re-election. Well, they were very nervous. Many of them were very nervous. I just saw one who won the closest race. A representative won by 13 points. Right, another freshman won by 22 points. It wasn't even close, not even close. And so I think they're realizing, oh wait, this is a winning issue. I think the president's team realized that it's a winning issue too. However, I think that voters, and so here's the hot take, I think that voters realize that education is a local decision, a more local decision. right? So the president does not, by and large, decide whether or not my school is going to be in person or remote. The president doesn't decide whether or not the high school in my area has 3 AP courses or 30 AP courses, right? This stuff that's local decision. And so I do think the voters realize, like, hey, I like what you're saying there, but by and large, these decisions get to be local. So maybe thinking a little bit about that then, and you can feel free to disagree with that, Ryan.
Absolutely, you're always right, Shaka. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Now all the comments will go crazy. So one of the, I do, even though I'm sort of like dialing down or the importance of the presidency in education decisions, your point that you made at the beginning is really well taken. The presidency does matter when it comes to education. This is the most important voice, right, and the biggest megaphone in the country. So assuming things continue to go his way, what are some of the things that you think a Biden presidency could mean in education? Because I've heard that there could be some pretty significant shifts, at least in thinking.
Yeah. I mean, and Chuck, I think that's exactly right. In thinking and in conversation, yeah, you will see very dramatic shifts. So much of policy making, whether it's on behalf of the president or whether it's on behalf of the Secretary of Education, whom he would get to a point if he were to become president. Most all of that stuff still has to go through the Congress, and so if it's not like that, a President Biden his assumed new Secretary of Education would just start writing laws the day they got into office. The vast majority of those things still have to go through the Congress, which at the moment appears that Republicans are going to maintain control of the Senate and have actually gained ground in the House, which would make it harder for him to pass any type of legislation that he wants to enact. But the conversation will certainly shift, and so the question really is more so to me around what does that mean for charter schools, and I think private school choice will always be a boogeyman that they try to make an issue out of, but since so much of that isn't really done at the federal level, there's not anything that they can really do about it. I do think that there's a pretty significant line item in the budget for charter schools, for federal charter school funding, and so that is an area that I think you're going to see advocates, if assuming that Vice President Biden does become the next president. I think that's the place that you'll see the biggest fight, and how much of that funding gets redirected towards what I think he would refer to as neighborhood schools or traditional public schools or whatever terminology that he wants to use. And of course, we all know the impact that charter schools are having on millions of students across the country. And so I think that's where you're going to see the biggest fight. Of course, there will be talks about COVID funding. I think that will only increase. What would a President Biden a presidency mean for school funding in the short term through some type of COVID relief package? I think that's another place that you could see an immediate impact. But I think by and large, the policy itself won't change. But I certainly think that the conversation on the national level will change.
Yeah, you mentioned something that I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about. You mentioned this phrase, neighborhood schools, and that phrase gets used sometimes. And I mean, it sounds great, because when I think about, frankly, when I hear neighborhood schools, I think about Sesame Street.
Yeah,
right? Sure. And I think it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. I'm like, who wouldn't want a beautiful day in the neighborhood? But I'll tell you. So my kids go to a charter school that is in our neighborhood. But I gather that when people use that phrase neighborhood school, they're not talking about the school that my kids go to. How's that phrase used? It sounds like code a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think it's a talking point more than anything else because, like you mentioned, I mean, there's this sense of nostalgia when it comes to a neighborhood school that everybody knew each other, and everybody got together for the big football games, on Friday nights. We're in the South, so we talk about that kind of stuff. But I think it's the sense of nostalgia. But to your point about your children going to a charter school that's within your neighborhood, when we first had kids, we lived literally a mile from a public school that we were not zoned for. We were zoned to go to a school that was about 7 or 8 miles away from our house. So whereas we could have walked to a elementary school to drop our child off at school, that isn't the school that we were necessarily zoned for. And so this whole idea of a neighborhood school, I think, is just it's a talking point that people like to use because in order to, I don't really want to say what they're trying to do, but I think, listen, at the end of the day, you and me, we're parents. We make decisions every day about our children and what our is in the best interest of our students. And I think that when it comes to making a decision about school, how close it is to your house is just a part of the conversation. And so while it would be a fantastic thought, to your point, like Sesame Street style, to say, oh, well, yeah, we just walk up the street to our neighborhood school. While that's a great thought, that's not necessarily reality for a lot of people. For a lot of people, their neighborhood school or the school that's in their neighborhood may just not be real good. It may not be educating their kids the way that they want it to do. And so they would be willing to drive 20 miles to go to a school to send their kid to a place that in order to get them a better education. We see that when it comes to charter schools. We see that when it comes to private schools. Parents who are willing to drive long distances in order to make sure their children receive the best education possible. So yeah, I definitely think it's a turn of phrase that people like to use to to kind of shift the narrative a little bit from what the other thing too, and feel free to interrupt at any point. The other thing is I do think that it's really a way to push funding in some instances, because no one wants to see their neighborhood school shut down. No one wants to see their neighborhood school go away.
Kind of like the post office, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a sense of comfort there. What are we going to lose if that school goes away? And I don't think neither of us want to see that school go away either. I think what we want to see is all kids just get a chance to get a high quality education, and if we can do that in that school, that absolutely, let's do that. But I do think there's a funding conversation that could be had there in a shift in that direction as well. But yeah, I mean, listen, at the end of the day, parents are going to make the decision about what's best for their child. And if it's a school that is literally in their neighborhood, then that's great. And if it's not, then that's great too. At the end of the day, we just want to make sure all of our kids are educated.
Yeah, boy. All right, Ryan, you just gave us a lot to chew on there. I thought I was asking a little question, but you gave us a lot of great information, because on that neighborhood schools issue, on, frankly, it calls to mind that a neighborhood school, that if a school is in a neighborhood, but the neighborhood has been constructed in a way that's not equitable, then we're going to also have some problems, right?
Right.
This idea about, people don't want to see a neighborhood school close, just like they don't want to see the post office close, except that everybody knows if you really want something to get there, you use UPS or FedEx or DHL, right? Listen, I don't want to bust the Postal Service chops right now, because I think they are doing their level best to get these votes in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But nobody wakes up in the morning and is really pumped about going there. We don't want schools to be a similar thing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so we covered a whole lot of ground in a little bit of time. I would love, and because I know that you are sort of an optimist at heart, what are you hoping for when it comes to education, when it comes to school choice over the next 4 years? maybe regardless of who's president, because we don't know who it's going to be. We got some guesses, but I haven't been right about anything else in 2020. So who knows? What do you hope for in the next 4 years?
Look, I think, at the end of the day, and I try not to be Pollyanna, but I think, we just want to, I think it goes back to exactly how I ended the last conversation. And that's, we just want to see kids get a high quality education. And I think, there are a lot of states where, in a lot of cases where that means that we need to give parents more options. We need to give parents the ability to make more options, because right now, to make those decisions, because right now they're simply too many families who are stuck in a situation that they just have no way of getting out of, and they have no avenue to get their child out of a school that just isn't performing, or their child is being bullied, or their child, take your pick of the issue. And so for me, I really hope that what we start to see is some, at some point, what would be nice is if education could be that issue that kind of starts bringing everybody together. There are way too many issues that we use as wedge issues to break people apart. I really think that education could be that issue that helps to bring people together. All around the idea of, it doesn't matter whether you go to a public school, a private school, a charter school, a magnet school, you're homeschooled, all of these things are fine. And let's just make sure that regardless of what those parents are choosing, that we give them the ability to do it at a high level. Because I think that's all we really want.
Yeah, I love it. and I think that parents know that, yes, on the one hand, I want the best for my kids, but I'm actually really happy if your kids are getting what's best for them too. Yeah. And if my neighbors are, and if the kids I don't know, who live 2 blocks away or whatever, if they're getting the best for them, that makes me happy too. If anything, this hyper partisan climate that we've been in has made me long for the days when people only used Facebook to share baby pictures. I'm like, let's do it. Let's get back to the good old days. Can I get a cat video and a toddler, pouring cereal all over the kitchen floor, please? I look forward to that. Ryan Cantrell, thank you so much for being with us on Choice Chats. Really, really good insights, and neat to hear that regardless of who's president, sounds like the fight for school choice, for options for more families, that it not only continues but is advancing across the country. So we appreciate you being with us.
I appreciate you having me.
All right, take care.
Thanks.